My husband said goodbye to go to his hometown to visit his mother, but when I called him, he forgot to hang up the phone, and I heard my husband say, "Just wait until the $10 million check from her father clears. I will leave that stupid wife of mine with nothing, and we will get married and raise this child together." I went into shock. It turned out my husband was with my best friend, who was pregnant with his child. In that moment, my world seemed to fall apart. But I was not going to stand by idly. I would make sure they regretted this betrayal. Before the story begins, please write in the comments what part of the world you are watching this story from. Do not forget to like and subscribe so this channel can continue to grow and bring you even more interesting stories. The morning atmosphere in the large house was warm and peaceful, as if no storm was about to break. Sunlight seeped through the gaps in the blinds, illuminating a living room decorated with designer furniture. There, Chloe was busy folding her husband Ethan's clothes. She performed her task with care and affection. Today, Ethan was heading to his hometown in regional Victoria to visit his mother Sharon, who they said was seriously ill. As a devoted wife, Chloe naturally felt worried about her mother-in-law's condition. She actually wanted to accompany him, but Ethan forbade it, arguing that the road trip would be exhausting and he did not want to see her tired, especially since Chloe had just recovered from a mild cold. Chloe obeyed her husband, trusting that Ethan cared deeply for her health. Ethan came out of the bathroom with his hair still damp. His face looked fresh, but there was a tinge of sadness that he seemed to be deliberately exhibiting. He approached Chloe, who was placing the last garment in a leather travel bag. Chloe looked at her husband tenderly, stroking his arm to give him strength. She knew how much Ethan loved his mother, and the news of her illness must have affected him greatly. Chloe prepared some snacks and a bottle of mineral water for him so he would not get hungry on the way. She made sure his wallet, mobile phone, and everything necessary were safely in the bag. There was not a hint of suspicion in her heart. To her, Ethan was the perfect husband, hard-working and loving to his family. During their 3 years of marriage, Ethan had always been sweet and had never shown any strange behavior. Saying goodbye on the porch of the house, Ethan hugged Chloe tightly, as if it was hard for him to leave her alone for a few days. He kissed her forehead for a long time, asked Chloe to take care of herself, to lock the gate securely, and not to wait up for him if he returned late the day after tomorrow. Chloe nodded obediently. She tucked a sum of cash into his jacket pocket, saying it was to buy fruit or medicine for Sharon. Ethan smiled slightly, thanking her in a tone of voice that sounded sincere, and then got into his car. Chloe stood on the doorstep, waving until her husband's car disappeared around the bend of the street in that prestigious Melbourne suburb. Her heart suddenly felt empty, but she pushed the feeling aside, praying for her husband to arrive safely at his destination and for her mother-in-law to recover soon. The wall clock ticked on, turning morning into afternoon and afternoon into evening. Chloe spent the time reading a book in the living room and tending to some plants in the backyard. As the sun began to set, nostalgia and anxiety began to creep in. By her calculations, Ethan should be about to arrive in his town. Chloe decided to call her husband just to make sure he was okay and that the trip had gone smoothly. She picked up her mobile from the coffee table, found her husband's contact, and pressed the call button. Several rings were heard before he finally answered. Ethan's voice sounded noisy on the other end. His breathing was a little heavy, as if he were walking fast or lifting something heavy. Ethan answered Chloe's greeting in a somewhat rushed tone. He said he had just arrived and the reception there was bad, so he had to hang up to help some relatives who were taking care of Sharon. Chloe, understanding, immediately agreed. She did not want to bother her husband, who was focused on his mother. Chloe said goodbye and waited for Ethan to hang up the phone. But this was where the strange thing happened. The call did not disconnect. It seemed Ethan had forgotten to press the red button, or his mobile screen had been accidentally touched, keeping the call active without him realizing it. Chloe was about to hang up from her side, but her fingers' movement stopped when she heard a creak, followed by the sound of a car door closing. Apparently, Ethan had not yet arrived at his mother's house, or perhaps he was somewhere else. Chloe brought the mobile back to her ear. Curiosity began to take hold of her. She heard the sound of footsteps on ceramic tiles, not the sound of a dirt path or the asphalt of a country town. Then she heard a laugh that was very familiar to her. It was Ethan's laugh, but not a sad or worried laugh like the one he had shown that morning. It was a liberated laugh, a laugh full of triumph that sounded strange and terrifying to Chloe at that moment. Chloe's heart began to pound. A bad feeling suddenly washed over her. She heard Ethan speaking loudly. His voice was as clear as if he had left his mobile on a table right in front of him. Ethan said he could finally free himself from the exhausting performance of the whole day. Chloe frowned, not understanding what he meant by performance, but the next sentence that came out of her husband's mouth was like a lightning bolt on a clear day, destroying all the trust Chloe had built over the years. Ethan said with a dismissive tone that someone had to be patient until the $10 million check from Chloe's father cleared. Ethan bluntly stated his plan to leave Chloe as soon as they had the money in their hands. The words "that stupid wife of mine" flowed smoothly from the lips of the man who had kissed her forehead tenderly that very morning. Chloe's chest tightened, her breath caught. She wanted to scream, she wanted to curse, but her voice seemed to disappear, swallowed by an overwhelming shock. Before she could process the pain, she heard another woman's voice responding to Ethan. That voice was so familiar. A voice that often accompanied her in her daily life. The voice she had entrusted her secrets to. It was the voice of Isla, her best friend. Isla laughed heartily, confirming Ethan's words and calling Chloe a complete idiot for not realizing what was happening behind her back. Chloe felt her world collapsing. The friend she trusted, the woman she often helped financially, turned out to be a venomous snake strangling her marriage. Chloe's tears began to stream down her cheeks, but she held back her sobs with all her might so they would not hear her. Her trembling hand quickly pressed the record button on the mobile screen. She needed proof. She had to be strong. The conversation on the other end was becoming more and more heartbreaking. Ethan could be heard pampering Isla, asking her about the state of her pregnancy. This new revelation made Chloe feel nauseous. Isla was pregnant with Ethan's child. They both talked about their future, about the luxury house they would buy, about holidays overseas, and how they would raise that child together using Chloe's father's money. They were celebrating their betrayal on the suffering of Chloe, whom they considered stupid and naive. Chloe heard Ethan say that he was sick of pretending to be a devoted and faithful husband in front of her. He was tired of listening to her father's lectures on business and ethics. Ethan confessed that the only reason he endured it was the inheritance and the injection of funds that Chloe's father had promised for a fictitious project Ethan had presented. Meanwhile, Isla asked Ethan to spend more time with her because she did not want her child to be born without a father by her side. Isla even mocked Chloe's style of dress, which she considered old-fashioned and boring. Unlike her, who always looked attractive in Ethan's eyes. Every word that came out of their mouths was a dagger stabbing deeper and deeper into Chloe's heart. Chloe's body slid to the floor, leaning against the living room sofa that now felt cold and strange. She hugged her knees with one hand while the other still held the mobile that was recording all that filth. She heard the clinking of glasses. Perhaps they were toasting to celebrate their evil plan. There was no alcohol, perhaps just juice or tea, but the celebration was equally profane in Chloe's eyes. Because it was built on the ruins of her marriage, the pain slowly transformed into disgust. Disgust at imagining that Ethan's hands, which had touched her that morning, had also touched Isla. Disgust at imagining that Ethan's sweet smile was just a mask to hide his greed. After almost 10 minutes of torture, the conversation began to die down. Ethan was heard saying he had to turn off his mobile so Chloe would not get suspicious if she called again. Chloe's heart pounded. She quickly stopped the recording just a second before the call disconnected from the other side. The mobile screen went dark, reflecting Chloe's face with swollen eyes and an empty gaze. Silence reigned again in the large house, but this time the silence was terrifying. Chloe remained sitting on the floor. Her legs felt too weak to stand up. She never imagined that a drama as cliché as those in soap operas would happen in her life. Her husband and her best friend, the two people closest to her, conspiring to destroy her. But in the midst of that devastation, a small determination began to grow in a corner of her heart. She would not let them win. She would not be the stupid woman they said she was. Chloe spent hours in the same position, letting the tears dry on her cheeks. The pain that had hit her so hard was slowly metamorphosing into a cold, lethal anger. She replayed the voice recording on her mobile, listening to every insult and the vile plan of Ethan and Isla over and over again. Every time she listened, her love for Ethan eroded, replaced by a calculated hatred. She also remembered all the moments she had spent with Isla, how Isla used to praise Chloe's kindness, how Isla often borrowed money from her for urgent needs, and how Isla was always present at every one of Chloe's family events. It turned out that it was all a strategy to get closer to Ethan and gnaw at Chloe's fortune from within. Chloe felt like a blind person who had just had her sight restored. Now all the oddities of the past made sense. She stood up, dusting off her clothes. Her first step was to go to the bathroom, wash her face with cold water to erase the traces of tears. She looked at herself in the mirror. The woman in the mirror looked fragile, but her gaze was now sharp as an eagle's. She fixed her hair, making sure no sign of sadness was visible. She had to play her cards right. If she confronted them now, Ethan would deny everything and turn the tables on her. Ethan was cunning. He could say the recording was edited, or that it was just a joke. Chloe needed more than just a voice recording. She needed their total destruction at the moment they felt on top. Next, Chloe picked up her mobile and called the only person who had the absolute power to help her, her father. Chloe's father was a veteran and respected property developer, someone very protective of his only daughter. When the call connected, Chloe tried to control her breathing so her voice would sound steady. She asked her father to come home immediately or to meet in a safe place because there was something urgent that affected the life and death of the company and her marriage. Hearing his daughter's serious tone, her father agreed to come without asking questions. Chloe knew that involving her father was a major step because her father's fury could end Ethan's career overnight. But Chloe did not want Ethan's destruction to happen overnight. She wanted Ethan to feel like he was flying high before she crashed him to the ground. An hour later, her father arrived. In the soundproof study, Chloe played him the recording. Her father's reaction was exactly as she expected. The old man's face turned red with contained anger, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He was about to call his lawyer and the police to arrest Ethan that very instant, but Chloe calmly stopped him. Chloe laid out her plan. She asked her father to hold back. She asked him to continue being nice to Ethan, even to pretend that the $10 million was about to clear. Chloe explained that the best revenge was to let Ethan and Isla dig their own grave with their greed. Her father looked at his daughter with new eyes. There was a mix of pride and sadness in seeing his daughter have to become so tough, but he finally agreed to follow Chloe's script. After her father left, Chloe began to map out her strategy in detail. She cleaned the house as if nothing had happened. She even cooked Ethan's favorite meal in case her husband came back early or to welcome him later. And so it was. 2 days later, Ethan returned. The sound of his car entering the garage. Chloe's heart pounded, not with love, but with adrenaline. This was the first act of her performance. She had to be the best actress in her own life. Chloe walked to the front door, putting on the sweetest smile she could muster. When the door opened, Ethan's figure appeared with a falsely tired face. Ethan hugged Chloe immediately, complaining about how tiring the trip had been and how sad he was about his mother's condition. Chloe returned the hug. Although every cell in her body screamed in disgust, she held her breath so as not to smell the perfume of another woman that might linger faintly on Ethan's clothes. In a tone full of concern, Chloe asked about Sharon's condition. Ethan lied fluently, making up a story about the doctor's diagnosis, about expensive medicines that had to be bought, and about how his mother kept asking about her. Chloe nodded, feigning passion, but inside she noted every lie as fuel for her hatred. She even offered to visit Sharon the following week, which Ethan subtly rejected with the excuse that the doctor had recommended isolation and complete rest. That night was the hardest test for Chloe, sleeping in the same bed with a traitor. Ethan fell into a deep and fast sleep, perhaps tired after having a good time with Isla on what he called visiting his sick mother. Chloe lay beside him, staring at the dark ceiling of the room. She listened to her husband's soft snoring, a sound that once gave her security and now sounded like that of a monster. Chloe turned on her side, looking at Ethan's face in the darkness. That face, which looked so innocent in sleep, concealed a million deceptions. Chloe whispered very quietly, almost inaudibly, promising that every tear she had shed that day would be extinguished with drops of Ethan's sweat and blood in the future. The next morning, Chloe began her performance. During breakfast, with a radiant face, she gave Ethan great news. She told him that her father had just called to inform her that the asset liquidation process for the $10 million was moving faster than expected. Ethan's eyes lit up instantly. The spoon in his hand stopped for a moment. Greed was clearly reflected in his gaze. Although he tried to hide it with a grateful smile, Ethan asked enthusiastically when he could receive the money. Chloe replied that maybe in a week or two, but that there were some documents Ethan had to manage for the change of ownership of the assets and to reduce taxes. Of course, it was a lie. It was just Chloe's way of keeping Ethan busy and making him feel that victory was within reach. Ethan seemed very excited, even forgetting to feign sadness for his mother. He immediately began to talk about his fake business plans, as if the money were already in his hands. Chloe listened attentively, occasionally offering supportive suggestions, making Ethan feel more and more on top of the world. In the middle of breakfast, Ethan's mobile vibrated. Ethan glanced at the screen briefly and then quickly turned it off. Chloe knew it must be Isla. In an innocent tone, Chloe asked, "Who was calling?" "Just a work colleague asking about the progress of a project," Ethan replied. Chloe smiled and nodded. Inside, she laughed. She knew Ethan must be impatient to tell Isla the news of the $10 million, and that was exactly what Chloe wanted. The higher their hopes, the more devastating their fall would be. That afternoon, Chloe left the house on purpose with the excuse of doing the monthly shopping. Her goal was to give Ethan space to call his accomplices freely. From a listening app she had secretly installed on Ethan's mobile while he was showering that morning, Chloe could hear their conversation in real time. Sure enough, as soon as Chloe was out the door, Ethan called Isla. Ethan's voice sounded euphoric. He shouted with joy, announcing that the jackpot was about to arrive. He promised Isla a luxury house in an exclusive area as a gift for the pregnancy. Hearing this, Chloe, who was driving her car, just smiled coldly. "Keep dreaming, Ethan. Dream as high as you can," Chloe murmured as she gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her revenge plan had just begun, and she would make sure there was no escape for the traitors. The news of the $10 million transfer was like a fresh wind that fanned the fire of greed in Ethan's heart even more. Since Chloe told him the fake news, Ethan's attitude became drastically more impatient and impulsive. Every time his mobile rang, he would jump slightly with an enthusiasm that was hard to hide, hoping it was a call from the bank or the solicitor. Chloe watched her husband's change in behavior with a subtle, meaningful smile. She saw how Ethan began to frequently visit luxury property websites and high-end car magazines on his tablet while they relaxed in the living room. Ethan no longer even tried to hide his interest in luxury items that were previously out of reach of his monthly salary. For Chloe, this was a sign that the bait she had thrown had been completely swallowed. The big fish was already on the hook. It was just a matter of waiting for the right moment to pull it out of the water and let it gasp until it ran out of breath. To accelerate her plan, Chloe decided to raise the level of her game. She wanted to see Isla's face, the woman who had stabbed her in the back, right in front of her. Chloe wanted to see how the two traitors would act before her eyes. So during dinner, in a relaxed and natural tone of voice, Chloe proposed an idea to Ethan. She suggested inviting Isla over for dinner at their house in 2 days. The reason was simple. Chloe said she missed her friend because they had not seen each other for a long time and she wanted to catch up. Besides, Chloe argued that she wanted to privately celebrate the good news about her father's money. Although the money had not yet been transferred, they could at least share their happiness with someone close. Ethan seemed surprised by the suggestion. His face tensed for a moment. His eyes shifted restlessly. Perhaps he feared his charade would be exposed if his wife and his mistress were in the same room. However, his greedy and arrogant nature quickly took control. Ethan thought it was an excellent opportunity to show Isla the luxury that would soon be hers. So Ethan agreed to the idea with feigned enthusiasm, saying it was a fantastic idea to keep in touch. The day of the dinner arrived. Chloe was busy in the kitchen since the afternoon, preparing special dishes as if welcoming an honored guest. She cooked several of Isla's favorite dishes, a gesture she once made out of a friend's affection, but which she now performed as part of her psychological warfare strategy. The aroma of the food filled the entire house, creating the illusion of a perfect, warm home. Exactly at 8 p.m., the doorbell rang. Ethan rushed to open the door, acting like a teenager in love, very different from the cold attitude he usually showed with Chloe's other guests. Chloe walked slowly from the dining room, controlling her breathing and expression. When she saw Isla enter, she felt a burning in her chest, containing her anger. Isla was perfectly made up and wore rather tight clothes that tried to highlight her curves. However, Chloe could clearly see a slight change in her friend's figure, especially in her abdomen, which was beginning to bulge a little, although it could still be concealed. Chloe greeted Isla with a warm hug, a hug that to Isla might seem normal, but to Chloe was a farewell hug to their dead friendship. Isla returned the hug awkwardly. Her eyes glanced sideways at Ethan, who stood behind Chloe with a mischievous smile. They believed Chloe did not see those exchanged glances, but Chloe caught everything clearly through the reflection in the large mirror hanging on the hall wall. Chloe invited Isla to sit in the dining room, which was already elegantly prepared. On the table were seared scallops, Wagyu steak, and other luxury dishes. There were no alcoholic beverages. Chloe only served fresh orange juice and cold mineral water, in line with the life principles that Isla had always ridiculed behind her back as old-fashioned. The atmosphere at dinner was strange. Ethan tried too hard to break the ice with bad jokes. Isla laughed too loudly in response to those jokes. Chloe just smiled politely, interjecting occasionally with short phrases. In the middle of dinner, Chloe began her attack. She poured mineral water for Isla into her empty glass. With a fixed gaze and a hard-to-interpret smile, Chloe said in a low but firm voice that she should eat a lot. Chloe commented that Isla seemed fuller lately. Her cheeks were fuller, and her aura was different. Chloe deliberately paused in her sentence, making Isla's and Ethan's hearts stop for a moment. Before continuing by saying that Isla looked like someone who was expecting great happiness, Isla's face, which was previously flushed with makeup, paled instantly. The fork in her hand clinked softly against the plate. Ethan choked on his drink, coughing a little to hide his nervousness. Chloe quickly offered a napkin to Ethan, patting his back affectionately. She asked in an innocent tone if Ethan was okay, why he reacted so exaggeratedly just because she had praised Isla for gaining weight. Ethan quickly shook his head, saying he had just choked. Isla, who had already regained her composure, tried to smile forcedly, saying that perhaps she had been eating too much lately due to work stress. Chloe nodded as if she believed her, but her gaze remained fixed on Isla's eyes, as if she were bearing her friend's soul. Then, Chloe began to talk about the plans for the $10 million. She said she wanted to renovate the house and perhaps donate a large portion to a charitable foundation because she and Ethan did not need that much money. Hearing the word donate, Isla's and Ethan's eyes widened. They looked at each other in panic and quickly interrupted her, saying it would be a shame to donate it, that it was better to invest it for the future of their children. Chloe smiled to herself. Her bait had worked. The fear of losing the money they did not yet have was beginning to corrode their sanity. The night ended with Isla leaving early with the excuse of not feeling well, leaving Chloe at the doorstep with a victorious smile. One act was over, and the enemy's morale was already beginning to waver. After the tense dinner, Ethan became even more obsessed with the money. Chloe's phrase about donating the money left him in a state of panic. He felt he had to secure the assets or make a large financial commitment so that Chloe could not dispose of the money at her whim to a foundation. In Ethan's narrow mind, poisoned by Isla and his mother, the $10 million was his right as compensation for his patience in putting up with Chloe all these years. Ethan began to leave the house frequently with the excuse of meeting clients or inspecting construction sites, when in reality he was looking for a luxury house with Isla. Isla, feeling her position threatened after Chloe's hint at dinner, demanded that Ethan buy her a house immediately as proof of his seriousness and as a guarantee for the future of the child she was carrying. The woman kept complaining and inciting Ethan, telling him that Chloe could change her mind at any moment, so they had to act quickly. Ethan took Isla to see a newly built luxury estate on the outskirts of the city. The houses were in a modern classic style with imposing pillars. Just as in Isla's dreams, they stopped in front of the largest unit, on a corner, a 2-story house with a private pool and a spacious garden. Isla fell in love at first sight. She walked through the rooms with shining eyes, imagining herself as the lady of that palace, hosting lavish parties and showing off her wealth to her friends. She hugged Ethan affectionately, telling him that this was her dream house and she did not want to see any other. The problem was that the price of the house was astronomical, far beyond Ethan's savings, which were actually insignificant. The property developer demanded a considerable down payment and the payment of the rest in short installments if they wanted to get a special promotional price. Ethan was desperate. He knew that the money from Chloe's father had not yet arrived, but Isla kept pushing, and he himself was afraid of losing the opportunity to get that luxury house. This is where Chloe's role came back into play. Chloe, who already knew her husband's movements thanks to the GPS tracker on his car and reports from a private investigator hired by her father, began to add more fuel to the fire. When Ethan returned home with a frown, Chloe asked him enthusiastically about the project he was managing. Chloe pretended to have received information from a friend who worked in the real estate sector that the land price in the area of the estate Ethan had visited was going to rise dramatically the following month. Chloe encouraged Ethan to make a major investment decision while he had the chance, assuring him that the $10 million would clear in a matter of days. Chloe's words were like a spell that clouded Ethan's logic. The support of his legitimate wife made him feel that his decision was right and safe. But Ethan still needed cash immediately for the down payment and administrative costs, which amounted to a considerable sum. No official bank would lend him that much money in such a short time without a long and complicated verification process, especially with Ethan's mediocre credit history. Desperate and blinded by greed, Ethan finally contacted an old acquaintance who had access to non-bank lenders, that is, high-level loan sharks. They could get him millions in a matter of hours, as long as there was a guarantee of a high-value property deed. Ethan remembered the safe in Chloe's study. The deed to the luxury house they lived in was kept there. The house was a wedding gift from Chloe's father, but the deed was still in her father's name, who had entrusted it to them. Ethan, in his stupidity, thought he could borrow the deed for a while, mortgage it to get the down payment for Isla's house, and then get it back the following week as soon as the check from Chloe's father arrived. He believed Chloe would never find out that the deed had been missing for a few days. One afternoon, while Chloe was at a social event, Ethan snuck into the study. His hands trembled as he dialed the combination of the safe he had secretly spied on. The steel door opened with a soft click. There was the brown envelope with the valuable document. He took it with heavy breathing. He felt like a thief in his own house, but he pushed the guilt aside, imagining Isla's happy face and the life of luxury that awaited him. He immediately took the deed to the solicitor's office associated with the loan shark. The process was very fast and simple because the value of the guarantee was much higher than the loan. Ethan signed a debt contract with exorbitant interest without reading it carefully. The only thing on his mind were the zeros that would appear in his bank account that afternoon. In the evening, Ethan returned to the house, radiant. He felt he had made a masterstroke. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were already in his personal account, and he had transferred the down payment to the developer of Isla's dream house. He felt like a winner. He felt he was one step ahead of Chloe. During dinner, Ethan seemed to eat with a great appetite and smiled to himself frequently. Chloe watched her husband with a cold gaze from behind her teacup. Chloe knew exactly what Ethan had done. She knew that the deed from the safe had changed hands, but Ethan did not know one thing. The deed that was in the safe was a forgery that Chloe had deliberately placed there a few days before. The original deed was safely in a bank's security box, in her father's name. Ethan had just mortgaged a fake document to a loan shark known for his cruelty and had just signed a legally binding debt contract in his name. Ethan felt on top of the world. He even began to behave with a certain arrogance towards Chloe. He told Chloe to be more frugal with the monthly shopping when he himself had just squandered dirty money on his mistress. Chloe obeyed the order with submission. Inside, she was counting down the time until her husband's ruin. That night, Ethan slept soundly, dreaming of his new house with Isla. Meanwhile, Chloe sat on the edge of the bed, looking at her husband's face, peaceful in his ignorance. Ethan had dug a very deep hole and had just voluntarily jumped into it. Chloe whispered softly, "Enjoy your last peaceful dream, darling, because tomorrow hell on earth will begin to greet you." The lifestyle trap had closed perfectly, and there was no spare key for Ethan to get out of it. The morning at Chloe and Ethan's residence felt different. There was a tension that slowly crept through the solid walls of the luxurious house. Today was the day of the arrival of Sharon, Ethan's mother, who was coming from the country with the excuse that she missed her son and daughter-in-law. But Chloe knew very well what the real motivation behind this sudden visit was. Since Ethan told her about the plan for the $10 million transfer from Chloe's father, Sharon's attitude had changed 180 degrees. If before she always made excuses about her old age and inability to travel far, now the middle-aged woman suddenly felt fit enough to undertake a several-hour road trip to the big city. Chloe received the news of her mother-in-law's arrival with a hard-to-interpret smile. She knew the vicious circle was completing. All the main actors in this drama of betrayal were finally gathering on the same stage, making it easier for Chloe to watch them and destroy them all at once. Without a trace, Chloe had prepared the ground-floor guest room impeccably, changing the sheets to new ones and placing a vase of fresh flowers on the bedside table. A perfect welcome from a devoted daughter-in-law, the role she would continue to play until the curtain fell tragically. Ethan's car entered the driveway just as the sun was beginning to rise. Chloe was at the front door, dressed in elegant and modest clothes, ready to receive her mother-in-law. The car door opened and Sharon got out with a somewhat exaggerated style. The woman wore her best clothes with flashy gold jewelry on her wrists and neck, as if she wanted to show that she was the mother of a future millionaire. Her face looked fresh and healthy, far from the image of a seriously ill person that Ethan had described when he asked for permission to go to his hometown. Chloe went forward and gave Sharon a respectful hug. Sharon pulled away a little quickly after the hug, and her eyes immediately scanned Chloe's entire house with a critical gaze, as if she were a building inspector looking for faults. There was no warm hug or sincere questions about Chloe's condition. The first sentence out of Sharon's mouth was a sharp comment about the garden lawn, which she said was not well kept enough, and about the paint on the fence, which she said was already worn. Despite Chloe having just hired a professional gardener the week before, the three entered the house. Ethan was busy carrying his mother's large suitcases, while Sharon walked like a queen inspecting her new palace. Chloe went to the kitchen to prepare drinks and snacks. From the living room, Chloe's sharp ears caught the low-voiced conversation between mother and son. Sharon impatiently asked about the certainty of the $10 million. She whispered to Ethan to make sure the money did not go anywhere, and reminded her son not to spoil Chloe too much. Chloe's heart boiled hearing the cunning of that woman. It was clear that the apple does not fall far from the tree. Ethan's manipulative and greedy nature was clearly inherited from his mother. Chloe took a deep breath, calming the storm in her chest, and then came out with a tray of hot tea and biscuits. She placed the tray on the table carefully, trying to act normally in front of the woman who had contributed to destroying her marriage. While they enjoyed their tea, Sharon began to launch her subtle verbal attacks. She started comparing Chloe to Isla. Although she did not mention Isla's name explicitly at first, the direction of her conversation was very clear. Sharon talked about a friend's daughter from her town who was very good at taking care of her husband, cooking, and what hurt the most, very fertile, able to provide male grandchildren quickly. Chloe simply lowered her head, pretending to listen obediently. Then Sharon said in a cynical tone that a good wife is not just one with a rich father, but one who can serve her husband in all aspects and give him heirs to continue the family name. That sentence was like a slap in the face for Chloe, who had not yet had children after 3 years of marriage. However, Chloe knew that Sharon was referring to Isla. She knew that Sharon had met Isla in the town when Ethan went to visit, and that they had surely celebrated Isla's pregnancy together. Chloe swallowed the pain, turning it into fuel for her revenge plan. The climax came when Sharon, perhaps too carried away by the euphoria of getting rich, began to lose control of her tongue. While chewing on a biscuit made by Chloe, she said that soon the house would be filled with the cries of a sturdy baby boy and that Ethan should prepare a special and luxurious room for his only heir. Ethan choked on his drink hearing his mother's slip. His eyes widened, gesturing for his mother to be quiet. Chloe, with a performance worthy of an AACTA award, frowned and asked innocently which baby her mother was referring to. She asked if any relative was going to have a child. The atmosphere instantly became tense and silent. Ethan quickly intervened, nervously saying that his mother was just fantasizing and wishing for Chloe to get pregnant with a boy soon. Sharon, realizing her mistake, laughed forcedly, confirming Ethan's words and saying she was eager to have a grandchild. Chloe nodded slowly with a slight smile, as if she believed that ridiculous excuse. But inside, she noted an important point. They were very sure that the child Isla was expecting was a boy, and they were already planning the future of that child in this house, Chloe's house. That afternoon, Ethan excused himself to go out for a moment with the excuse of an urgent work matter, but Chloe knew he was going to see Isla to calm her down, as she would surely be jealous that Sharon was staying at Chloe's house. Thus, Chloe was left alone with Sharon. Sharon, feeling tired from the trip, asked Chloe to bring her small handbag, which had been left in the car, to the guest room. Chloe politely agreed. Taking the bag from the car, Chloe noticed it was quite heavy. She took it to the guest room. Sharon was in the bathroom. Chloe did not miss this golden opportunity. Her curiosity guided her hand to slightly open the zipper of the bag. She had no intention of stealing, just looking for evidence. And indeed, the instinct of a betrayed wife is sharp. In a side pocket of the bag, which was slightly open, a piece of paper was sticking out, a purchase receipt that had not been thrown away. Chloe's hand trembled as she took it out. It was a receipt from a well-known baby goods store in a nearby city. Dated 2 days ago, just when Ethan had excused himself to go to his hometown, her eyes scanned the list of items purchased: a set of baby clothes for a boy, an expensive brand-name electric breast pump, a nursing pillow, and premium prenatal vitamins. The total purchase amounted to a considerable sum. At the bottom of the receipt, the loyalty points were listed under Ethan's name. Chloe felt her breath catch, so the money she had given Ethan to buy medicine for his mother had been used to buy items for his lover's baby. And Sharon, the woman who was supposedly seriously ill, had gone shopping with him to choose those forbidden items. Chloe quickly took out her mobile and photographed the receipt from several angles as irrefutable proof. Then she placed the receipt back in its place very carefully, making sure its position was exactly the same so as not to arouse suspicion. When Sharon came out of the bathroom, Chloe was already by the window, arranging the curtains. Her face was calm, showing no sign of the whirlwind of anger burning inside her. Sharon thanked her with a dry tone and then asked Chloe to leave because she wanted to rest. Chloe nodded and slowly closed the guest room door. As soon as the door closed, Chloe leaned against the hallway wall. Tears of rage fell one by one. She felt a deep disgust. Disgust for Ethan, disgust for Isla, and what turned her stomach the most, Sharon's hypocrisy. The three of them were conspiring to squeeze her fortune, insulting her behind her back while enjoying the comforts she provided. Chloe wiped her tears abruptly. She would keep the proof of the purchase receipt in a special envelope labeled "Evidence for Destruction." That envelope was now thicker, as thick as their sins. Chloe swore there would be no mercy for them. If they wanted to play with fire, Chloe would make sure they all burned to ashes. Today Sharon had arrived with arrogance, but later she would leave with a humiliation she would not forget for the rest of her life. The sun had barely begun to set, but the dark clouds covering the city sky seemed to reflect the mood of the house's inhabitants. After finding the proof of the baby goods purchase receipt, Chloe realized she could not just wait for the date of the fictitious fund transfer. She had to accelerate their mental destruction. She had to create a rift between the conspirators. The divide and conquer strategy was the best option at that moment. Chloe knew that the bond between Ethan, Isla, and Sharon was not one of sincere love, but a transactional bond based on greed. And that kind of bond is very fragile, easy to break with a small jolt of suspicion. Chloe took her first step by buying a new anonymous SIM card. She installed it in a spare mobile she had hidden in a kitchen drawer. Her first target was Isla. Pregnant women often have unstable emotions and tend to be more suspicious. Chloe wrote a short but lethal text message and sent it to Isla's personal number. The message read, "Be careful. The man who promises you a luxury house is playing with fire with another woman, besides his wife. Do not become just a stepping stone. Check who he calls often in the middle of the night. The anonymous message was sent just when Ethan was at home, watching television peacefully with Sharon. Chloe watched from a corner of the room, waiting for the chain reaction that would follow, and so it was. Less than 10 minutes later, Ethan's mobile vibrated on the table. Ethan looked at the screen, and his face tensed. He quickly picked up the mobile and went to the backyard with the excuse of bad reception. Chloe knew Isla must be exploding on the other end, demanding an explanation about the other woman mentioned in the mysterious message. While Ethan was busy calming down a furious and manipulated Isla, Chloe launched her second attack. This time, her target was the relationship between Ethan, Sharon, and Isla. Chloe printed a brochure she had designed herself very convincingly. The brochure was an exclusive advertisement for the Happy Sunset Residence, a luxurious but isolated aged care facility. In the brochure, Chloe circled several accommodation packages with a red marker and wrote a small note in the margin in a handwriting that deliberately imitated Isla's. "The best option for Mum when we move into the new house." Then Chloe carefully slipped the brochure into Ethan's work briefcase, which was in the living room, among other office documents, but visible enough to be found if the briefcase was opened. Chloe knew Sharon's habit of snooping through her son's things, especially if it involved money or property. The second bait was taken. That evening, while Ethan was showering, Sharon opened Ethan's briefcase, probably to make sure the $10 million transfer documents were ready. But what she found was the brochure for the aged care facility. Chloe, pretending to read a magazine on the sofa opposite, could see Sharon's face turn red. The old woman's hand trembled as she held the brochure. She read the handwritten note in the margin and immediately concluded it was Isla's work. Sharon, who until now had boasted of Isla as her ideal future daughter-in-law, felt betrayed. She thought Isla wanted to get rid of her in an aged care facility as soon as they got the money and the new house. The anger of a mother who feels despised is terrible. Sharon crumpled the brochure and put it in her dressing gown pocket with heavy breathing, waiting for the right moment to confront them. That night, dinner became a cold battlefield. Ethan looked exhausted and tense. The dark circles were clearly visible under his eyes from the argument with Isla on the phone that afternoon. He tried to be nice to his mother, but Sharon responded sharply and with a look full of suspicion. Ethan was confused, not understanding why his mother's attitude had suddenly changed. Chloe enjoyed her dinner in silence, occasionally offering food to her mother-in-law with a polite smile that only managed to irritate Sharon more. Sharon probably thought Chloe was too stupid to understand the intrigue that was unfolding, when in reality, Chloe was the mastermind behind all the chaos. The tension reached its peak when Ethan's mobile rang again. This time, Ethan did not dare to answer. He just looked at the screen in despair. Isla's name was clearly displayed. Seeing Ethan's hesitation, Sharon, already full of prejudice, exploded. "Answer it. That illegitimate wife of yours surely wants to remind you of the promise to throw your mother into an aged care home, right?" Ethan was dumbfounded, not understanding where his mother had gotten that crazy idea. "What are you talking about, Mum? Who wants to get rid of you?" Ethan asked in a panic. Sharon threw the crumpled aged care brochure in his face. "Do not play dumb. I found this in your briefcase. Whose handwriting is this, if not that woman's? She is barely pregnant with a bastard child, and she already dares to control my life," Sharon screamed hysterically. Chloe feigned surprise, dropping her cutlery and covering her mouth with her hand as if shocked by the argument. Ethan tried to defend himself, saying he knew nothing about the brochure, but Sharon was already too hurt. In the midst of the chaos, Isla, impatient because he was not answering, kept calling until finally Ethan was forced to answer on speakerphone, as his hands were busy holding back his mother, who was trying to hit him. Isla's shrill voice filled the dining room. Without mincing words, Isla shouted in a very clear, threatening tone, "Hey, Ethan, do not stay quiet. If you do not transfer the extra monthly money to me tonight and explain who your other mistress is, I do not care about anything anymore. If that $10 million is not cleared by tomorrow, I will come to your house and tell your holier-than-thou wife everything. Let it all sink at once." Isla's shout echoed, creating a deathly silence. Ethan was as pale as a ghost. The blood seemed to drain from his face. He looked at Chloe in horror. Sharon also fell silent, realizing that Isla's threat could ruin their plans to get Chloe's fortune. Both mother and son, greedy, now looked at Chloe with fear, afraid that she had heard and understood Isla's threat. Chloe, who had heard everything clearly, decided to deliver the final blow that night. She slowly stood up from her chair. Her face was impassive. She approached Ethan, took the mobile that was still connected to Isla, and calmly hung up the call. Chloe looked her husband directly in the eyes and said in a soft but piercing voice, "Darling, it seems your friend has a lot of problems, doesn't she? Screaming about $10 million and all that. Who is she exactly? And why does she sound like she has so much right to my father's money?" The question was simple, but deadly. Ethan stammered, his tongue tied, unable to invent another lie. Cold sweat ran down his temples. Sharon pretended to cough loudly to divert attention. Chloe smiled sideways, a smile that chilled Ethan's blood. Without waiting for an answer, Chloe turned and went to her room. "Sort out your affairs with that friend, darling. I do not like strangers making noise in my house. And you, Mum, you should rest. High blood pressure is not good for elderly people who are afraid of ending up in an aged care facility." Chloe closed her bedroom door firmly. Behind the door, she let out a small laugh. She had succeeded. Ethan was now trapped between Isla's fury, Sharon's anger, and Chloe's suspicion. Tomorrow was the day of execution, the day Chloe had promised the fund transfer. Ethan did not know that what would clear tomorrow would not be money, but the tears of blood from his regret. The morning sun's rays were intense, as if the universe itself was warming the atmosphere for what was about to happen that day. Ethan got up earlier than usual. His eyes shone with expectation, although the dark circles from lack of sleep were still visible on his face. Today was the day he had been waiting for, the day he believed his destiny would change and he would become a millionaire. He put on his best shirt, impeccably ironed by Chloe, styled his hair carefully, and sprayed an excessive amount of expensive cologne. In front of the mirror, Ethan practiced a victorious smile, imagining himself signing a $10 million check. Meanwhile, Sharon was no less excited. The woman wore an elegant suit she had bought especially for the occasion, complete with a silk shawl she flaunted, as if she were a grand dame about to receive an award. Chloe watched all this activity from the dining table with an overwhelming calm, like the surface of a tranquil lake that hides a deadly whirlpool within. She had already prepared everything. The execution stage was set in her father's office. The journey to Chloe's father's office was made in 2 separate cars. Ethan insisted that Isla accompany them. His excuse to Chloe was that Isla, as a close friend, could act as a neutral and trustworthy notarial witness. Chloe simply nodded without arguing, making Ethan feel that his plan was going smoothly. In reality, Chloe wanted Isla to be there to see with her own eyes how the sandcastle they had built crumbled. Inside Ethan's car, the atmosphere was tense but filled with a restrained euphoria. Ethan drove with sweaty hands, while Sharon, sitting beside him, kept praying for the money to clear without any hitches. Isla, sitting in the back seat to keep up appearances, kept touching up her makeup, making sure she looked perfect at the moment of victory. She imagined that after the signing, Ethan would take her directly to a luxury car dealership. Chloe's father's office skyscraper rose imposing in the city center, clad in blue glass that reflected the clouds. Upon entering the majestic lobby with its polished marble floor, Ethan's confidence faltered slightly. He always felt small in front of his father-in-law, who possessed a strong leadership aura. But the image of $10 million strengthened his resolve. They were greeted by Chloe's father's personal assistant, a polite but stern-faced woman. They were led to the main boardroom on the top floor, a VIP room normally used only for shareholder meetings or signing multi-million-dollar contracts. The room was huge, dominated by a long, gleaming mahogany table and comfortable leather armchairs. The view of the city from the gigantic windows was breathtaking, as if offering the world in the palm of one's hand. At the head of the table, Chloe's father was already waiting. His face was calm, imposing, and unreadable. He did not smile when his son-in-law and his mother-in-law entered. He just nodded briefly, inviting them to sit. Ethan, Sharon, and Isla sat together on one side of the table, while Chloe sat on the other, right next to her father. This arrangement unconsciously created a clear division between uses and them. Ethan tried to break the ice by asking about his father-in-law's health, but only received a brief throat clearing that intimidated him again. A solicitor and the company lawyer were also present, looking through thick files, which added an air of formality and seriousness to the meeting. Ethan's heart pounded. His eyes did not leave the pile of documents he believed contained the asset transfer and the promised check. Sharon clutched her handbag nervously while Isla tried to sit upright despite the back pain from her pregnancy. Chloe's father opened the meeting with his deep, resonant voice. He spoke of the importance of trust and integrity in managing family assets. The words trust and integrity were spoken with special emphasis, making Ethan feel a little targeted, but he ignored it. Then the father explained the complicated procedure of the donation, the taxes, the management responsibility, and the long-term commitment. Ethan nodded enthusiastically, agreeing to all conditions without really listening. The only thing on his mind was where he had to sign for the money to be transferred to his account. Sharon even interrupted with a naive question about whether she could withdraw a portion in cash that same day, to which Chloe's father's lawyer responded with a withering glare. After almost an hour of listening to a boring lecture on laws and business, the awaited moment arrived. Chloe's father signaled to the solicitor. The solicitor handed a dark blue folder to Ethan. Ethan's hands trembled as he received it. He opened it slowly, expecting to see a check or a security certificate. However, the folder was empty. There was only a blank sheet of paper inside. Ethan frowned in confusion, looking at Chloe's father with a questioning expression. Chloe's father smiled slightly, a smile that did not reach his eyes. He said calmly that before handing over the original documents, there was an indispensable condition that the beneficiary had to fulfill. That condition was the verification of family harmony through family documentation. Ethan and Sharon looked at each other, confused. Family documentation. They had to take a photo together. Ethan nodded quickly, saying he was willing to do anything. He even put his arm around his mother's shoulder, showing how harmonious they were. Isla beside him remained silent, feeling a bit excluded from the happy family scene. Chloe's father picked up a small remote control from the table, pressed a button, and the automatic blinds closed, darkening the room. A large projector screen slowly descended from the ceiling. Ethan smiled broadly, thinking they were going to watch a wedding video or Chloe's childhood photos as a nostalgic gesture before the inheritance handover. He was already prepared to put on an emotional face. The projector screen lit up with a brilliant white, dazzling for a moment. Then an audio visualization appeared, moving sound waves. There was no image, only sound. Silence took over the room, and then the voice was heard. A very familiar voice. Ethan's voice. Clear, loud, and undistorted. "Relax, darling. Just wait until the $10 million check from that stupid woman's father clears. I will divorce her, and the three of us will enjoy the money with our child." Ethan's face, which was previously radiant, turned as pale as the blank paper in the folder. His eyes widened, staring at the screen as if seeing a ghost. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His heart seemed to stop. Before he could process what was happening, the next voice appeared. A woman's voice. "My friend is a complete idiot, isn't she, darling?" It was Isla's voice. Isla, sitting in the room, flinched. She instinctively covered her mouth. Her eyes widened, looking at Chloe in horror. Then, the laughter of both of them was heard. A mocking, condescending laugh. A laugh that at the time seemed so pleasant to them, but now sounded like the death knell. The recording continued, playing the disgusting conversation about their plans to raise their illegitimate child with Chloe's father's money, about how sick Ethan was of his wife, and how naive Chloe was in their eyes. With each passing second, the air in the room seemed to become scarce for Ethan, Isla, and Sharon. Sharon, sitting in the middle, seemed to have suffered a mild stroke. Her face was frozen, her breathing shallow. She turned her head stiffly towards her son, then towards Isla, and finally towards Chloe, who was sitting quietly with an impassive face. Chloe was not looking at the screen. She was looking directly at the three people in front of her, enjoying every grimace of terror that appeared on their faces. Chloe's gaze was cold, penetrating, and deadly. There was nothing left of the sweet and obedient Chloe. There stood a betrayed woman who now stood as the judge of her betrayers. The recording ended with the dramatic click of the phone hanging up. The lights in the room came on again, exposing the faces of the sinners, now covered in cold sweat. The silence that followed was much more terrifying than the sound of the recording. No one dared to speak. Ethan felt his knees weaken. He clung to the arms of the chair to keep from falling. He tried to find words to defend himself, but his mind was blank. The truth was too obvious, too naked. Chloe's father placed the remote on the table with a sharp thud that made them jump. It was the judge's gavel that began the real trial. The atmosphere in the VIP boardroom turned into a frozen hell. The air conditioning could not cool the thick beads of sweat running down Ethan's temples. He swallowed, the saliva feeling like thorny sand in his throat. His cunning mind desperately sought an escape, an excuse, a scapegoat. With a trembling voice, Ethan finally broke the silence. He stood up on shaky legs and pointed at the now empty screen. He shouted in a forced tone that it was all a lie. He accused the recording of being fake, a product of artificial intelligence or deepfake technology. He swore on God and his mother's life that he had never said such vile things. He acted as if he were the victim of a cruel slander, hoping to see a glimmer of doubt in his father-in-law's eyes. Sharon, hearing her son's defense, instantly joined in with crocodile tears that suddenly welled up. She lamented that her son was a good man, incapable of committing adultery or having bad intentions. She even dared to accuse Chloe of fabricating the recording out of jealousy or to keep the entire inheritance for herself. Isla, for her part, chose to remain in sepulchral silence. Her face was as pale as wax. She kept her head down, not daring to look at anyone. Her survival instinct told her the situation was hopeless. Chloe listened to all these denials with an ironic and disdainful smile. She was not surprised. She had already anticipated that Ethan would hide behind the excuse of technology. Without a word, Chloe opened her briefcase, took out a thick brown envelope, and threw it into the center of the table, right in front of Ethan. The envelope slid smoothly over the polished surface and stopped when it hit Ethan's water glass. "You cannot fake an ultrasound or the chat history on your mobile, darling," Chloe said in a flat tone that chilled the bones. Ethan's hands trembled violently as he opened the envelope. Its contents spilled out. Ultrasound photos of a fetus with the patient's name, Isla, clearly printed in the top corner, along with the date of the scan, which coincided with one of Ethan's business trips. There was also a stack of screenshots of WhatsApp conversations between Ethan and Isla, full of affectionate words, secret wedding plans, complaints about Chloe, and proof of the monthly transfers Ethan sent to Isla's account. And to make matters worse, there was the photo of the baby goods purchase receipt that Chloe had found in Sharon's handbag, with Ethan's membership number included. All the evidence was real, physical, and irrefutable. Ethan's denial about AI was shattered before those papers. Ethan collapsed into his chair, defeated, his shoulders slumped, his gaze lost in the ultrasound photo he held in his hand. He was finished. He was completely finished. Sharon, seeing the proof of the purchase receipt, gasped for air, her face flushed with shame and fear. She realized her carelessness had been one of the nails in the coffin. Chloe's father, who had silently observed the drama of denials, finally stood up. His tall, imposing figure seemed to radiate a contained anger. With a voice that was not loud, but full of authority, he pronounced his verdict. He stated firmly that there was no $10 million. There never was, and there never would be for a traitor. The story of the fund transfer was just a bait suggested by Chloe to bring their greed to light. Then, Chloe's father pointed at Ethan. He fired him from his position in the company's subsidiary, effective immediately. All company facilities, including the car, laptop, and corporate credit card, were revoked and blocked on the spot. Ethan had not only lost the future inheritance, but also his job, his career, and his reputation in the business world, because Chloe's father would ensure his name was blacklisted in his business circle. "And as for you," he said, turning to Isla, "I will make sure you can never work in any company in this city again. You betrayed the friend who considered you a sister for a bit of money. Enjoy your life with this unemployed man." Isla began to sob quietly, a cry of late regret. But Ethan's nightmare was not over. Hearing there was no money, his mind immediately flew to the massive debt he had taken on a few days earlier. He had borrowed money from a loan shark with the guarantee of a fake deed, assuming he could pay it back today with Chloe's father's money. Now that source of income was gone. That meant he had a gigantic debt about to mature, with interest that kept growing and an invalid guarantee. His life was in danger. Ethan's face went from pale to ashen. He realized he was not just poor, but in grave danger. Suddenly, Ethan knelt on the floor and crawled towards Chloe's feet. He cried out loud, shedding all his dignity. He begged for forgiveness, saying it had been a slip, that he was bewitched, that the devil had tempted him. He swore he would leave Isla that very instant and become a good husband again. He clung to the hem of Chloe's dress, kissing it hysterically. Sharon also joined in the crying, begging her son-in-law not to be so cruel, reminding him of the sin of breaking family ties. The scene was pathetic and disgusting at the same time. Chloe looked at the man prostrated at her feet. The man she once loved, the man she trusted to lead her home, was now nothing more than trash begging for mercy. With a slow but firm movement, Chloe pulled her dress from Ethan's grasp, as if she had just touched something dirty. She took a step back, maintaining her distance. Then, Chloe removed the wedding ring from her ring finger, the white gold ring with diamonds that Ethan had placed there with promises of fidelity. She looked at the ring for a moment and with a slight flick, let it fall to the floor, right in front of Ethan's tear-streaked face. The clink of the ring against the marble echoed in the silent room. "Take it, darling. It is the only thing left of our marriage. Sell it to buy milk for your child with Isla, or maybe it will be enough to pay for your bus ticket back home, because the car downstairs has already been repossessed by my father's office driver." Chloe spoke these words with a tone of finality. There was no tremor of sadness, only immense relief. She felt a great weight had just been lifted from her shoulders. Ethan looked at the ring in despair, and then at Chloe, who stood like an unshakable tower. The building's security guards then entered, summoned by the assistant, and dragged away a still hysterically crying Ethan, a Sharon who pretended to faint, and an Isla who walked with her head bowed in shame. Ethan's screams still echoed in the hallway until the lift door closed, taking with it the rubbish from Chloe's life. In the room, Chloe exhaled a long sigh, turned, and hugged her father. Her armor cracked a little, her tears fell, but this time they were not tears of sadness, but of liberation. She had won, she was safe, and she was ready to watch how karma worked its way, much more cruelly, out there. The midday sun shone brightly, mercilessly burning the skin of anyone exposed to it. On the pavement in front of Chloe's father's imposing office building, 3 human figures stood with empty faces and an appearance that contrasted with their surroundings. Ethan, Sharon, and Isla had just been forcibly ejected by security guards. They stood, stunned, on the edge of a noisy avenue. The street dust flew up, hitting their faces still damp with cold sweat and the remnants of tears. The luxury company car they had arrived in with pride that morning had already been returned to the company garage. Ethan's wallet was empty, his credit cards blocked, and the wedding ring Chloe had thrown had been left on the boardroom floor because Ethan was too panicked when he was dragged out. They truly had nothing but the clothes on their backs and an unbearable shame. People passing by looked at them strangely, and for good reason. Sharon, dressed in a flashy party suit, was sitting on the dirty pavement. Isla was crying her eyes out while holding her belly. And Ethan, in his impeccable suit, looked like a madman who had lost his mind. The silence between them was broken when Sharon started to apportion blame. With a hoarse voice, she hit Ethan's arm, shouting and asking what he was going to do about her now. She demanded Ethan take responsibility for bringing her from her hometown only to be humiliated like this. Sharon also blamed Isla. She pointed at Isla with her trembling finger, accusing her of bringing bad luck. According to Sharon, if Isla had not seduced Ethan, Chloe would not be so furious, and she could still be enjoying the comforts of her daughter-in-law's house. Isla, pregnant and with her emotions raw, did not accept the blame. She responded to Sharon's shouts with a shrill voice, screaming that she was the victim of Ethan's sweet promises. She said she had become his lover because Ethan had promised her luxury, not poverty and humiliation on the street. A heated argument broke out on the public footpath, becoming a free spectacle for the delivery drivers waiting nearby. Ethan ignored the fight between his mother and his mistress. His mind was occupied with a terror far more real than his mother's reproaches. He remembered the loan shark. Today was the deadline for the first interest payment and the repayment of the principal if he wanted to get the house deed back. The problem was, the deed he had given as collateral was fake, and he did not have a single cent. Ethan put his hand in his trouser pocket and took out his mobile with trembling hands. He had dozens of missed calls from an unknown number. He felt his heart leap into his throat. He knew who was calling. The debt collectors must have sensed that something was wrong. Ethan tried to turn off his mobile and run, but before he could press the button, he received a text message. It was short but terrifying. "We know where you are. Do not run, or your mother becomes the collateral." Ethan froze. His eyes frantically scanned the surroundings for signs of danger. And sure enough, from a corner, 3 black sports motorbikes moved slowly against the traffic and stopped right in front of them. The riders were burly men in black leather jackets with menacing faces. They got off the bikes calmly but intimidatingly. An aura of violence filled the air. Ethan recognized one of them, the right-hand man of the loan shark's boss, the one who had handled his loan. The man took off his helmet, looking at Ethan with a crooked smile that revealed yellowish teeth. He approached Ethan and patted him on the cheek, gently but painfully. He asked with false kindness where his money was. Ethan backed away in fear, unable to speak. He tried to lie, saying there was a technical problem at the bank and the money would be available tomorrow. But the heavy was not stupid. He laughed out loud, a laugh that made Isla scream in fear and hide behind Sharon. The man grabbed Ethan by the collar of his jacket and pulled him close until their faces were inches apart. He whispered harshly that his boss had already verified the authenticity of the deed at the land registry that morning because he was suspicious of his behavior. The result? The deed was fake. That meant Ethan had committed fraud against the sharks of the underworld, and scamming a loan shark carried a punishment much more severe than the law. The man signaled to his companions. The other 2 heavies grabbed Ethan and held his arms behind his back. Ethan cried out in pain, begging for mercy, saying he did not know the deed was fake, but his screams were ignored. They began to drag him towards a black van that had just pulled up. Sharon, hysterical at seeing her only son treated like an animal, tried to grab the clothes of one of the heavies, pleading for them to let him go, but an old woman's strength was no match. One of the heavies pushed her roughly, making her fall onto the hot asphalt. Her knees were scraped, and her elegant suit was dirtied with street dust. Sharon cried out loud, calling for Ethan. Meanwhile, Isla, terrified, tried to escape. She saw an opportunity while the heavies were busy with Ethan and his mother. She backed away slowly and then turned to run towards a taxi rank. She no longer cared about Ethan or Sharon. The important thing was that she and her baby were safe, but karma was not done with her yet. She had barely run a few steps when a police car with its siren on cut her off. 2 female police officers got out and stopped her. Isla, confused and panicked, asked what was wrong. She felt she had not committed any crime. The police showed her an arrest warrant. Chloe had not been joking. She had reported Isla for embezzlement. For years, Chloe had entrusted Isla with money for shopping or to pay for shared things, but it turned out Isla often kept a portion or used it for her own expenses. Chloe had proof of transfers and complete financial records. Isla resisted, shouting that it was a misunderstanding, that she was Chloe's best friend. But the police did not care. Cold metal handcuffs closed on her wrists. The pregnant woman was led to the police car, crying over her fate, which had changed drastically in a matter of hours. Returning to Ethan, the situation became even more chaotic. The heavies were about to put him in the van when another police siren was heard approaching. The commotion on a main avenue had attracted the attention of a patrol car, in addition to the alert from Chloe's father's building security. Seeing the police, the heavies did not want to risk being caught. They released Ethan abruptly, gave him a kick in the stomach as a farewell, and fled at high speed on their bikes, weaving through traffic. Ethan coughed, holding his aching stomach, and collapsed on the pavement. He thought he was safe, but it turned out the police had not come to help him, but to arrest him. Chloe's father had reported Ethan for document forgery and attempted fraud using others' property. With the case of the fake deed, Ethan had no escape. In front of his own mother, Ethan was handcuffed. The scene that afternoon was tragic and, at the same time, a relief for anyone who knew the real story. Ethan was led to the police car with a bruised face and wrinkled clothes. Isla had already been detained in another car. Only Sharon was left alone on the pavement. The woman who had arrived that morning with her chin held high was now on her knees on the hot asphalt, lamenting her fate. Her favorite son, arrested for fraud, her ideal future daughter-in-law, a criminal, and she herself, abandoned in the big city without a cent to return to her town. No one helped her. People just watched and recorded the scene with their mobiles, perhaps to make it go viral on social media with the title, "Instant Karma for a Greedy Family." In the distance, a luxury black sedan passed by slowly. The tinted window rolled down a little, enough to reveal a pair of eyes watching the scene coldly. It was Chloe. She saw everything. She saw her ex-husband being dragged away by the police. She saw her ex-best friend crying behind the bars of a patrol car. And she saw her evil ex-mother-in-law, now humiliated on the street. There was no mercy in Chloe's heart. She had given them many chances to reconsider, but they chose greed. Chloe rolled up the window, ordered the driver to move on. She would not stop. She would not look back. For her, the rubbish had already been thrown in its place, and now it was time to clean the remaining dust from her life, to move towards a clean future. Chloe's car made its way through the bustle of the city, leaving behind the pathetic drama on the pavement like a dark chapter already closed. 6 months had passed since the shocking event in front of the office building. Time passed very differently for each person involved in this story. For Ethan, time dragged on slowly and painfully behind prison bars. He was found guilty of document forgery and fraud, in addition to the burden of the debt with the loan shark, who did not leave him alone even in prison. In his narrow, damp cell, Ethan lost all his arrogance. He was no longer the elegant and overbearing man. Now his head was shaved. His body was emaciated from stress and prison food. He was often the target of harassment by other inmates who despised family fraud crimes. Every night, Ethan slept huddled on the cold floor, accompanied by endless regret. He often dreamed of the comfortable life he had with Chloe, of the hot coffee in the mornings, the fragrant clothes, and his wife's sincere smile. Upon waking, he only found damp concrete walls and the smell of urine. He missed Chloe, not out of love, but because he realized how stupid he was to trade a diamond for a handful of sharp pebbles. Isla's fate was no less wretched. Due to her advanced pregnancy, her legal process was delayed slightly. However, she had to serve house arrest under strict surveillance and live in absolute poverty. She gave birth in a small health center with basic facilities, without the company of a husband or family. The child born was a boy, just as Sharon had hoped, but his birth was not celebrated with lavish parties or a dream nursery. The baby was born into tears of hardship. Isla had to take on sporadic jobs as an hourly cleaner, carrying her baby on her back because she could not afford a nursery. Her face, once always cared for, was now dull and looked much older. She lived in a small rental flat in a rough neighborhood with a roof that leaked every time it rained. Every time she heard her son cry from hunger, Isla cursed herself. She remembered how she mocked Chloe and now felt how hard life was without support. A life she herself had destroyed for a whim. Meanwhile, in a town far from the city's hustle, Sharon spent the rest of her life in overwhelming loneliness. After the arrest, social services sent her back to her town, but the news of her son's crimes had spread everywhere. The neighbors, to whom she once boasted of her son's success, now looked at her with disdain. No one wanted to be her friend. The shops would not give her credit. Sharon suffered a mild stroke due to the prolonged shock, which left half of her body paralyzed. She had to drag her leg just to get a glass of water. Her house, once tidy, was now dirty and messy because she could not clean it. She often sat on the porch, looking at the empty street, hoping for Ethan's luxury car to come and get her, but it was just a hallucination. She remembered how good Chloe had been, her daughter-in-law, who always sent her medicine, clothes, and money without complaining. Sharon cried in silence. Her tears fell on the dusty dirt floor. Her arrogance had burned the bridge to happiness, and now she was trapped alone on the island of regret. In contrast to the suffering of the three, Chloe's life shone brightly. Freed from the burden of the parasites that had been sucking her energy, Chloe focused on developing the business inherited from her father. She completely revamped the company's management, introducing innovations that sent profits soaring. Her appearance became even more elegant and distinguished. Her face, which before often looked sad from emotional pressure, was now always adorned with a sincere smile that radiated inner peace. Chloe also became actively involved in various social activities, helping women victims of domestic violence and betrayal to recover, just as she herself had done. She became an inspiration to many. Her broken marriage did not traumatize her but made her stronger and more selective. Her father was very proud of his daughter's transformation. They often spent time together, peacefully enjoying the fruits of their labor, without the fear of being taken advantage of by cunning people. One sunny afternoon, Chloe was sitting at her favorite outdoor cafe, enjoying a cup of chamomile tea while reading a book. A gentle breeze played with the edge of her scarf. Her mobile on the table vibrated. Chloe looked at the screen. An unknown number appeared, but the area code was from the region where Ethan's prison was located. Chloe knew it must be him. Perhaps he had borrowed a guard's phone or gotten one smuggled in, trying to contact her for help, money, or simply to apologize and ease his guilt. In the past, Chloe might have answered, listening with a pounding heart, and perhaps she would have softened. But the Chloe of now was a new woman. She looked at the screen without emotion. There was no explosive hatred, only absolute indifference. To her, Ethan was a closed past, a chapter of a book she had sealed and whose key she had thrown away. Chloe smiled slightly, very slightly. Her index finger moved slowly towards the mobile screen. She did not slide the green button to answer but pressed the red button to reject the call. And she did not stop there. She went into the call settings menu and selected the option to block the number. The mobile screen returned to calm, displaying a beautiful wallpaper of a natural landscape. Chloe went back to sipping her hot tea, feeling the warmth of the liquid travel through her body, as warm as the feeling of freedom she now possessed completely. She looked up at the orange and golden sunset sky. Her life had just begun again, and this time she was the scriptwriter, with no antagonists who could ruin it. In the distance, birds flew freely back to their nests, just like Chloe's heart, which had finally returned home to a place of peace and happiness.